This is not a podcast for comfort. It's a podcast for clarity. In a culture flooded with noise, dangerous narratives, and emotional uncertainty, this space exists to examine what actually matters and what actually works. Here we question power itself, belief systems, and the assumptions most people inherit without inspection. Most people accept instead of dissect. This podcast is about correcting that. Welcome. Bienvenue. Welcome. Marhaban. Bienvenidos to the Magnificent Ones podcast. Before we go any further, I want to make something clear. This episode is not intended to be a sermon, nor is it intended to persuade anyone toward a particular faith tradition. What I want to do today is something I've rarely done on this podcast. I want to show the foundation underneath the foundation. Many of you have listened to me discuss leadership, strategy, responsibility, and economics, culture, organizational behavior, and the psychology of decision-making. You've heard my conclusions. You've heard my frameworks. You've heard my observations. What you probably haven't heard is where many of those ideas originate. In many ways, this episode is an examination of my own operating system, the assumptions that shape how I view the world, the principles that influence how I make decisions, the ideas that keep me oriented when circumstances become difficult. Every person has their North Star, whether they realize it or not. Something that helps them determine direction when certainty is unavailable. For me, much of that framework can be traced back to two passages of Scripture, not because they provided easy answers, but because they provided some enduring questions. Questions about loyalty, questions about responsibility, questions about stewardship, questions about what it means to continue moving forward when the path ahead is unclear. Today, for perhaps the first time on this podcast, I want to share that part of myself with you. Because if we're going to spend years having conversations about leadership, then it's only fair that you understand the principles that shape my own. With that, welcome back to the Magnificent Ones podcast. Today, I want to do something a little different. Every philosophy rests upon assumptions that exist long before the philosophy itself. And if someone were to ask me, what are the ideas that sit underneath your ideas? I'd point to two passages of Scripture, not because they're famous, not because they're popular, and certainly not because they're easy, but because they've fundamentally shaped how I view people, responsibility, adversity, leadership, money, stewardship on purpose. The first is Ruth 1:16, and the second is Psalms 23. One teaches loyalty, the other teaches agency. And together, they have become part of my framework through which I interpret reality itself. This episode is not about convincing anyone to believe what I believe. Rather, it's about transparency. I think leaders owe people transparency. If you're going to ask others to trust your judgment, they should understand the principles that govern that judgment. Today, I want you to know mine. Most people can tell you their values. Fewer can tell you their operating system. The value, or a value, is what you believe. An operating system is what actually governs your behavior when circumstances become uncomfortable. Those are two different things. Everybody believes in loyalty until loyalty becomes expensive. Everyone believes in courage until courage becomes dangerous. Everybody believes in conviction until conviction carries consequence. Pressure reveals operating systems, not the mission statement, not the social media post, not the inspirational quote. Pressure reveals the truth. And that's why Ruth matters. See, the book of Ruth begins with collapse, loss, death, uncertainty. Naomi loses her husband, her son died. The future she imagined disappears, and suddenly The people standing around her face a decision. Do they stay? Do they leave? Naomi tells them to leave. Nobody would blame them. Nobody would criticize them. In fact, from a practical perspective, leaving makes perfect sense. And Ruth says something extraordinary. She says, "Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God." I want you to notice something. Ruth is not committing herself to prosperity. She's committing herself to uncertainty. She's not committing herself to success. She's committing herself to a relationship. There is no guarantee of reward, no guarantee of status, no guarantee of comfort, only commitment. That distinctions everything because loyalty is not proven when circumstances are favorable. Loyalty is proven when departure would be understandable. I think one of the great challenges of modern society is that we have become exceptionally good at evaluating transactions and increasingly poor at evaluating commitments. Everything is measured through utility. What do I gain? What do I receive? What is my return? While there is nothing inherently wrong with rational self-interest, a society built entirely on transactions eventually struggles to build trust. Trust requires permanence. Trust requires consistency. Trust requires people who remain when the immediate incentives disappear. That is what Ruth represents. And frankly, that is one of the things I look for in most people. Not obedience, not agreement, not admiration, loyalty. I want to be clear. Loyalty is not the same as blind allegiance. Blind allegiance is dangerous. Loyalty does not mean refusing to challenge someone. Loyalty does mean not abandoning the truth. Loyalty means remaining committed to the relationship while still respecting reality. Those are not mutually exclusive. In fact, the strongest relationships often contain both. One of the reasons Ruth resonates with me is because leadership is ultimately relational. We spend enormous amounts of time discussing strategy, yet strategy does not execute itself. Systems do not execute themselves. Organizations do not execute themselves. People do not execute themselves. Every meaningful accomplishment in human history requires people working together toward a common objective. And when adversity arrives, leaders discover something fascinating. The question is rarely whether the strategy was perfect. The question becomes who stayed, who remained committed, who continued showing up. History remembers visionaries, but visionaries accomplish very little without people who are willing to build alongside them. Now we come to the second passage, Psalms 23. This one influences me differently. Ruth teaches me how to think about people. Psalms 23 teaches me how to think about reality itself. Most people focus on comfort gained within Psalm 23. I focus on the structure because Psalms 23 contains a profound observation. It acknowledges that valleys exist, that difficulty exists, that uncertainty exists, that loss exists. Psalms does not deny reality, it confronts it directly. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, notice what is not written. It does not say the valleys disappear. It does not say that hardship evaporates. It does not say life becomes easy. The valley remains. The difference is present. One of the concepts I think about often is agency, not control. Agency. Those are different ideas. Control implies command over outcomes. Agency implies responsibility for the actions. Many people spend their lives attempting to control variables that are fundamentally uncontrollable: markets, politics, the economy, other people, the future. The problem is that reality eventually humbles everyone. Psalms 23 offers an alternative. Instead of obsessing over control, focus on stewardship, focus on responsibility, focus on what is actually yours to govern: your conduct, your integrity, your decisions, your effort, your character. That is agency. And strangely enough, the moment people stop trying to control everything, they often become far more effective because now their energy is focused where it can actually create results. Leadership becomes dangerous when leaders begin believing they are indispensable. History is filled with examples. Organizations collapse because leaders become convinced they alone are holding everything together. That mindset eventually creates exhaustion, arrogance, isolation, burnout. Psalms 23 challenges that assumption. It reminds us that there are forces larger than ourselves, that we are participants within reality, not masters of it. That distinction matters because it creates humility, and humility creates perspective. A leader with perspective makes better decisions than a leader intoxicated by control. This philosophy also influences how I think about money. Many people are surprised by how much practical financial wisdom exists within Scripture, particularly in Psalms and Proverbs. Consider the opening statement of Psalms 23: "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." That is not an argument against ambition. It is an argument against scarcity thinking. Scarcity creates panic. Panic creates poor decision. Poor decisions create avoidable suffering. Proverbs repeatedly emphasizes discipline, stewardship, patience, delayed gratification, sound judgment. These are not merely spiritual concepts. They are economic principles. And they work because human behavior remains remarkably consistent across generations. Technology changes, humans mature, but human nature does not. When I combine these two passages together, something interesting happens. They form a complete framework. Ruth answers the questions: how should I relate to people? Psalm 23 answers the question: how should I relate to uncertainty? Ruth teaches commitment. Psalms teaches trust. Ruth teaches loyalty. Psalms teaches stewardship. Ruth teaches responsibility to others. Psalms teaches responsibility to oneself. One is horizontal, one is vertical. One governs relationship, one governs adversity. And together, they create stability, not because life becomes easier, but because they provide a framework capable of surviving difficult situations. If someone were to ask me to summarize the foundations of my leadership philosophy, I would likely begin here. Not within business books, not within management theory, not within organizational psychology. Through all of those things, though all those things matter, I would begin with Ruth. And I would begin with Psalm 23, because one taught me what loyalty looks like, and the other taught me that there is a difference between agency and control. One taught me how to stand beside people, the other taught me how to keep moving forward when uncertainty is all that's available. And perhaps that is ultimately what leadership is. Not the pursuit of power, not the pursuit of status, not even the pursuit of success, but the disciplined stewardship of responsibility to people, to principles, to purpose, and to whatever calling has become placed before us. So I wanted to say thank you for spending this time with me. Until next time, continue building wisely, continue thinking deeply, and continue becoming the type of person whose character remains intact long after circumstances have changed. This is the Magnificent Ones podcast, and I'll see you in the next episode. If this podcast challenged you, good. Clarity often does. The point here isn't consensus or reassurance. It's to leave you more precise than when you arrived. Keep what sharpens your thinking. Discard the rest. But don't confuse familiarity with truth. If this conversation mattered, follow the podcast and share it selectively with people who value depth and not noise. Until next time, stay disciplined with your thinking, selective with your attention, and honest about what you're really optimizing for.